Hello and welcome to the first installment of Legos and Literature. Today I will be doing two of my favorite things, talking about literature and building with Legos. While I put together the Lego Ideas Jazz Quartet, I will be talking about one of the most influential time periods in American literature, the Harlem Renaissance. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this build. The Jazz Quartet set contains 12 bags, 1,606 pieces, and 5 booklets. It is a Lego Ideas set, which means that a fan came up with the idea and other Lego enthusiasts voted to bring this build to life. This particular set was designed by Shin-Wei Chi and conceived for market by Lego model designers Ollie Gregory, Justin Ramsden, and Maria Salgado, with senior graphic designer Diego Lopez Sancho fine-tuning the instrument's design. One unique feature of this build is that each of the 4 members of the quartet have their own stage and booklet, so you can either build the entire set by yourself or as a collaborative effort with you and your friends, sort of as a way to mimic the collaborative effort that is jazz. When I'm building a set, the first thing I like to do is go through one bag at a time and separate out the pieces so I can find them quicker. My nephew and fellow Lego builder hates that I do this. He likes to just go for it. Once we have the pieces all separated, it's time to get started on the build. The first stage is going to be the trumpet player. When I first saw this set, I knew instantly I wanted to talk about the Harlem Renaissance while I built it. So what was the Harlem Renaissance? Most likely you've heard this phrase before, likely during February, possibly amongst a scattering of poetry by the most well-known author to come out of this period, Langston Hughes. The Harlem Renaissance was so much more than that, though, and despite its name, the movement wasn't only in Harlem. It took places in other cities with major black populations, such as Chicago, Boston, and Detroit, even other countries. It was born from a time of movement in the United States, both geographically and politically, fueled by a rising black middle class who were putting an emphasis on education and a desire to connect the African American voice to the world. Now, the first part of our stage is nearly done. Let's pause to take a quick look. This little gray piece is going to connect to the bigger piece just like that, and we can see how it lines up nicely. Now, we're on to bag 2. The Harlem Renaissance roughly took place between 1919 and 1940 and was a time period in American history where African American artistry was encouraged and celebrated. Emphasis was placed on black writers, authors, journalists, playwrights, and musicians, and centered around a desire for self expression and acceptance of that expression into the greater American zeitgeist. To understand why this was so important, you have to take a look at the history of black literature. For most of the early years of U.S. history, black voices were sparse. For all of the Phyllis Wheatleys, Franklin Douglasses, and Sojourner Truths that got to tell their stories, there were thousands of others that never got told. During slavery, it was discouraged and even illegal in many places to teach a black person to read and write. What this meant from a practical viewpoint is that the voice of black people in America was largely silenced. Black history, culture, family, joy, pain, and triumph was told largely from the view of the dominant white class. When slavery ended in America, despite the centuries of abolitionist movements, there was no real plan for how to integrate the former slaves into a greater society. Enter the Freedmen's Bureau, which existed from 1865 to 1872, with the intention of providing support to the newly freed slaves as well as poor white Americans. It is very important to note that programs like free schooling did not exist for poor whites in the South in high numbers until after the end of slavery, a great demonstration of how inequality affects everyone, not just the populations that they are targeting. And this brings us to the completion of our first member of the jazz quartet, the trumpet player. With his starch white shirt, maroon suspenders, vibrant red tie, and fly do, he looks ready to blow the roof off the building. Which brings me to the emergence of one of the world's most famous trumpet players, Louis Armstrong. Headlining under the title of the world's greatest trumpet player, Louis Armstrong earned that reputation by sharing the stage with the likes of Bessie Smith, Fats Domino, and Ma Rainey, to name a few, providing music for silent movies and live shows, playing venues all across the country, including ones that, because of segregation and discriminatory practices, he himself would not have been able to attend as a patron. Armstrong's career started in New Orleans before he moved to Chicago in 1922 for a chance at a better life, and he wasn't alone. After the Freedmen's Bureau was dismantled, restrictive laws, the rise of the KKK, and the implementation of Jim Crow laws placed Southern blacks essentially back in slavery by fact, if not by law. With industrialization, however, and new skilled jobs with employers willing to hire black labor, a great migration happened where families left their homes in the segregated South in droves to move north for better opportunities and a chance at a dignity that they couldn't get under Jim Crow. Armstrong quickly made a name for himself by playing cutting competitions, of which he was a frequent winner. A cutting competition is a battle traditionally held between two musicians where they prove their prowess by outplaying each other. It's believed that this may be the predecessor for the modern rap battle that we enjoy today. Armstrong would play with King Oliver in Chicago for several years before he recorded his first studio album in 1923. The next year, he would marry Lil Hardin, who encouraged him to step out of the shadows of other musicians and make a name for himself. He went from playing the cornet to the trumpet and did a little experimenting with the trombone as well. After gigs with the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra, the top black band at the time, he worked with Clarence Williams and later formed the Hot Five Band. Armstrong, with Kid Ory, Johnny Dodds, Jonny St, and his wife Lil on the piano, recorded 24 records. For comparison, during the Jackson Five's run from 1969 to 1975, they released 11 albums. The Hot Five produced 25 albums in just a year's time span. So let's take a quick break here to talk about our build. Our bass player has joined our trumpet player, and our bassist is looking pristine in black tuxedo pants and all white, complemented with a cute little black bow tie. With this next bag, we will be putting together the bass for our bassist. Putting the bass together is going to be kind of nostalgic for me because I used to play the cello when I was in fourth grade. We're not making a real bass today, so we'll just have to pretend we're taking the same care that would go into making this instrument. FYI, a person who makes stringed instruments is called a luthier. I am not a luthier, but it appears my kitty wants to take a shot at it. Excuse us. In 1929, Armstrong started his vocalist career with the Hot Chocolates, playing alongside the legendary Fats Waller. He would continue to sing and work on his craft for decades, producing hits like Dream a Little Dream of Me and one of my favorites, What a Wonderful World. His career spanned across records, radio, movies, and plays, some of which are still prominent to date. Because of the rise in popularity of black music, which in turn gave rise to the popularity of black musicians, jazz and blues became the foundations for which a lot of the creators during the Harlem Renaissance built their works upon. Langston Hughes, celebrated as possibly the most famous writer to emerge from the Harlem Renaissance, wrote many works about the influence of jazz. His poem, The Trumpet Player, is a direct reference to Louis Armstrong. In that poem, Hughes begins with the line, "The Negro with the trumpet at his lips has dark moons and of weariness beneath his eyes," and further says of him and jazz that the music is honey mixed with liquid fire. Kitty has now decided he needs to keep a close eye on production. As for us, we now just have the final touches to complete our bass, which includes a scroll, peg box, and nut. As you can see, to Kitty's delight, our bass comes with strings to make our instrument as realistic looking as possible. Our bass will only have two strings instead of the traditional four, and unfortunately doesn't produce any real sound, but it's still a really cool feature to include nonetheless. Since our bassist would be nothing without his bass, we will merge the two pieces together, and just like that, we're halfway done. I chose to start off with jazz when talking about the Harlem Renaissance because while jazz is famously more musical than literary, there is a tradition in black music of writing code into lyrics. Negro spirituals such as Follow the Drinking Gourd was a way to pass along information to slaves escaping north. So was true with the works of musicians during this time. Written into snazzy tunes were messages of cultural awakening and reckoning alongside songs that had special meaning to the musicians writing and performing them. Duke Ellington's "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing," recorded in the year before Bubber Milley died, was an homage to Miley's life philosophy. And lines like "I'm white inside, it don't help my case 'cause I can't hide what is on my face," and Armstrong's "What did I do to be so black and blue," can be seen as examinations of American colorism and race politics. In Hughes's Dream Boogie, his narrator questions, "You think it's a happy beat?" and challenges readers to listen to what's beneath the palatable, danceable beats to the creator's true feelings. Hughes' appreciation and respect for jazz can be seen throughout much of his work, such as in his poems Song for Billie Holiday, Jukebox Love Song, and the aforementioned Dream Boogie. He also penned poems about his love for life that centered around Harlem. Although written after the official end to the Harlem Renaissance, in his poem named after the city, Hughes famously questions, "What happens to a dream deferred?" In 1959, Lorraine Hansbury would attempt to answer that question in her play A Raisin in the Sun, whose name was taken from a line in that same poem. Hughes, born in Joplin, Mississippi in 1901, came from a privileged background than most writers who came to prominence during this time. Like many black Americans, he came from an ancestry of slaves and slavers, with both of his great grandfathers being slave masters. Unlike most, however, he grew up in a family that was educated and politically active, and although he was born in the South, he grew up in the Midwest and was taught to have pride in his ancestry. He first moved to Harlem in his 20s to attend Columbia University, but then stayed even after he dropped out of school. I connected with Hughes' poetry at a very young age. Like him, I was born in the South and spent my formative years in the Midwest. The first poem that I remember that really sat with me was I to America. As a young child in southern Illinois, in a town where I was one of only a few black children, I was able to connect intimately to the themes expressed in that poem. From I Too, I discovered the Negro Speaks of Rivers, fellow Renaissance contemporary Countee Cullen in his poem Incident, and Paul Laurence Dunbar's We Wear the Mask. My first published poem, What Count, published when I was 10, was my first attempt to channel the feelings that were expressed in these men's works and how they related to the outside world. They helped to ignite a passion in me that would carry me into adulthood and stays with me to this day. Sort of like Kitty, who, no matter how many times I set him down, stays on my work table, making sure I know he's always there. Although Hughes may have been the most well known voice to emerge from this time, Claude McKay is recognized as the first major poet of the Harlem Renaissance. Born in Jamaica, McKay's earliest works were about his observations about the peasant class and his surroundings. After the publication of his poetry books, Songs of Jamaica and Constab Ballads, he became the first black person to receive the Medal of the Jamaican Institute of the Arts and Sciences. McKay used the prize money from that honor to come to the United States intent on studying at the Booker T. Washington Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama, but that was short lived. He would spend a brief 2 years at Kansas State before he moved to Harlem, where he would pen Harlem Shadows, a book of poetry critics said virtually inaugurated the Harlem Renaissance. A common theme you will find expressed throughout the written works of the Harlem Renaissance was the question of race and what it meant to be black in America. In McKay's 1921 poem, America, he says, Although she feeds me bread of bitterness, I confess I love this cultured hell. Illustrating the love hate relationship many black people had for the country they were born into or migrated to, but treated them as second class citizens. How to deal with this dichotomy was a constant subject for debate. 24 years before the Harlem Renaissance, in a speech dubbed the Atlanta Compromise, Booker T. Washington encouraged black people in America to cast down your buckets where you are. Washington, who was born a slave in 1856, believed that instead of challenging Jim Crow laws or swaying political sentiment, black people should remain in their own communities and focus on education and self reliance. W.E.B. Du Bois, founder of the NAACP and born in Massachusetts in 1868, believed that society should uplift the talented tenth of the population and have them assimilate into the greater American society. Washington's argument that black people must earn the right to the American dream was favored among whites, especially politicians, while in the eyes of many black people, he was seen as a sellout to his race. Think of it as the Kendrick Lamar versus Drake debate of the 1900s. In a way, the Harlem Renaissance became the testing grounds for the bucket versus talented 10th debate. The person credited with creating the movement, McKay, was a student of Booker T. Washington, while Du Bois' influence could be seen underwritten throughout. Let's pause a moment to update on the build. Our drummer and drum set is now done. And can we please appreciate the quality and detail that went into the set because it is truly remarkable. Our drummer set has a kick drum, hi-hat, cymbals, hands that actually grip the drumsticks, and look at those shoes. This is craft. Okay, we're almost done and entering the last part of our build that I'm most excited for, the piano. Just the amount of effort and work that went into the smaller scale down piano has me excited about getting to tackle the 3,662 piece Lego Ideas grand piano. What I love about the Lego Ideas sets is that it shows how art and science interact. As a culture, we like to take a binary view of things and place people into if not this, then that categories. The Harlem Renaissance was not exempted from that binary thinking. New school versus old school, Afrocentric versus Eurocentric, light skin versus dark skin, vernacular versus standard English was just some of the dichotomy that was expressed during this time period. Sets like this one subvert the idea that it's either or and ties into my wider philosophy that everyone should write or create art of some kind. Alice Walker calls this searching for our mother's gardens. In the book Sula, author Toni Morrison talks about one of her characters being an artist without an art form and how that lack of an outlet can lead to destructive behavior. I agree. People were made to express themselves as a means to connect with others. Art should be celebrated and every voice should be uplifted. If we acted more like the birds who lend their voices to the air simply because they like the sound of the song, we would be better off as a people. While I'm working on getting the signature curve of the grand piano, Kitty has decided to take another pass at examining our upright. Please note, no kitties were harmed in the making of this jazz set. As steady as the tick of a metronome is in the background, the literary magazine The Crisis was there as a constant throughout the Harlem Renaissance. Founded in 1910 by Mary Dunlop McLean, Oswald Garrison Villard, Kelly Miller, Charles Edward Russell, J. Max Barber, William Stanley Braithwaite, and of course, W.E.B. Du Bois, The Crisis's stated goal was to be a record of the darker races. Besides Du Bois himself, noted alumnus, either as writers or editors of the magazine, were James Weldon Johnson, Marita Bonner, Langston Hughes, Effie Lee Newsom, and County Cullen, to name a few. And while McKay may have jumped off the movement, it can be argued that it wouldn't have grown and expanded if not for the works and guidance of Jessie Redmond Fawcett. During the 1920s, she saw to it that literary works flourished in the crisis. Although Fawcett's influence was instrumental to the success of the Harlem Renaissance, her name and writing is often buried in the discourse when talking about it. Born in 1884, Fawcett worked her way through the public school system of Philadelphia, where she would graduate from high school in 1900. In an attempt to keep her from attending Bryn Mawr, an all female college, Bryn Mawr secured her a scholarship to attend another university, Cornell, where she became the first black woman to be a member of Phi Beta Kappa. She would later move to D.C., where she taught for several years before obtaining her master's degree and began her work for the crisis. During a 9-year time span between 1924 and 1933, Fawcett would publish 4 works: There is Confusion, The Chinaberry Tree, a novel of American life, comedy, American style, and her most well-known novel, Plum Bun, a novel without a moral, which tells the story of a black woman who passes as white in order to achieve a more privileged life than she'd enjoy as a person of color, only to find her freedom was still limited because she's a woman. If black male voices in America were considered muted by mainstream culture, black female voices were practically non existent. The women of the Renaissance had the extra burden of having to walk a tightrope between being black and being a woman. They were often expected to do the backbreaking work without the benefit of receiving their lion's share of the credit, or as Zora Neale Hurston sums up in her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, black women were the mules of the world. In her essay on being young, a woman, and colored, Marita Bonner captures the struggle women face with the line, and of course, a husband you can look up to without looking down on yourself. This line speaks to the struggle of how women's voices historically have been silenced in order to amplify the voices of the men of the movement. In that same essay, she says of femininity, "You know that you cannot live with a chip on your shoulder, even if you can manage a smile around your eyes, without getting steely and brittle and losing the softness that makes you a woman." Bonner, born in 1899, was one of the voices of the Renaissance who didn't live in New York. She grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, and was educated at Radcliffe College before she moved to Bluefield, Virginia to teach. She later made her way to Washington, D.C., where she would attend the famous Georgia Douglas Johnson's weekly salons. Between 1925 and 34, she published and won contests for her short stories, music, and essays. Among the plays she wrote were The Pot Maker, The Purple Flower, and Exit an Illusion. In 1930, she married, and her life in the D.C. literary movement ended as she settled into married life. She would remain in Chicago until her death in 1967. The last author that gets a mention, Zora Neale Hurston, is one that, while relatively well known now, never got the proper recognition she deserved in her time. She was an essayist, an anthropologist, and a poet. She wrote about folklore and filmed interactions with the people she interviewed. Because she grew up in an all-black town, Hurston's views on race and integration differed greatly from many of her contemporaries. In her 1928 essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me, of race, she said, "Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it doesn't make me angry, it merely astonishes me. How can any deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me. In Harlem, she would meet and befriend Langston Hughes, whom she would enjoy a professional relationship with for several years, including co founding the magazine Fire and working together to write the play Mealbone, which would ultimately lead to their falling out. I have to pause here a little to gush on just how impressed I am with this piece. It's like they thought of everything. Not only does it have an adjustable lid, when you lift it, you can see that it has the rest where the lid prop stick goes. There's a harp resting on top of the strings. We have the hammers, even the simulated red felt. At the bottom, you have three pedals, and I haven't counted, but I'd bet that there are 88 keys to the keyboard. This gold color is really a nice touch as well. This is just great work. While Hurston is best known for her novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, her earlier writing was also notable. Her first novel, Jonas Gourdvine, was based off of her father's exploits as a preacher and philanderer, and was well received. Written in 1935, Mules and Men is considered to be the first collection of African American folklore published by a black author, and she would receive varying success with her other works: Dust Tracks on the Road, Moses, Man of the Mountain, and Seraph on the Swanee. Sadly, when Hurston died in 1960, it was in poverty and obscurity, buried in an unmarked grave in a segregated cemetery. It wouldn't be until author Allison Walker went in search of her grave to give her a proper burial that Hurston would begin to receive her long overdue due. While I could not cover all the amazingness that is the Harlem Renaissance, I hope I gave you some information you didn't know, and you can continue to learn more about this time period in American culture, and will go out and read the poetry, essays, and novels that were mentioned, and find new ones for you to fall in love with. This brings us to the end of our build. Like with all the other pieces in the set, our pianist is stylish, well dressed, and looks ready to blow us away with her musical prowess. Now, all that's left to do is to fit all of our pieces together. The Harlem Renaissance was a time period of creation and wonder, collaboration and individuality, pain and heartache, love and loss. A harsh but valid criticism about this time period is about its authenticity, because most of the named artists had patrons, specifically patrons who were white. Patronage played a huge role in shaping the Renaissance. Creating is not a free undertaking. In order to have art, artists have to have the tools, space, and time to create. Patronage gives them these things, but it comes at a cost. It gives artists money and resources to practice their craft, in so much that it does not misalign with the thought, feelings, and opinions of the patron. Charlotte Osgood Mason and Carl Van Vechten were two of the largest patrons of black artists during this time, and their views on race and racism unquestionably shaped Hughes, Hurston's, and many other writers' works. While Mason's support helped Hurston pen her autobiography, Dust Tracks on the Road, it did not go to market until she removed several passages that might have been considered objectionable to white audiences and would have played better with black ones. And Van Vechten, himself a writer, in 1926 penned a novel about Harlem's nightlife, calling it In Haven. Hurston, who was still professionally in contact with Van Vechten as late as 1948, was no doubt influenced by a man who had turned the beauty was Harlem into a best-selling slur. That's why community support is important. Remember to support your artist friends and family so they can continue to add their voices to the world. And don't forget to write your stories. To quote Hamilton, you have no control over who lives, who dies, who tells your stories, unless you write them yourself. Kitty has come in to give one last inspection and to help with editing before it goes to the final resting place, Chef Paul's Cafe in downtown Fresno, where we'll be in good company. Thank you for watching. Until next time.